Good morning, everybody. I'm Douglas Haig. I'm the Vice Chairman of the Residential Landlords Association, and we're here today at the Jury's Inn in Cardiff for the third annual conference of Future Renting Wales for the Residential Landlords Association. And I'm really pleased this morning to be joined by Emma Williams, who's the Deputy Director for Housing for the Welsh Government. So she's actually here this morning on behalf of Julie James, who's the Housing Minister. And I have to point out a little caveat before we go ahead with the interview, is that she is a civil servant, so there's only certain types of questions I'm allowed to ask her and certain things she'll be able to answer on. So I can't go full blown as I might do with the minister herself. So forgive me if I haven't asked some of the questions you'd like me to ask. So. Emma, thank you very much for being here this morning with us. There's a lot going on in the private rented sector in general, although I do seem to keep saying that every year over the last few years lately. So we've just gone through a new bout of fees, and there's a new policy that the Minister's recently announced on the social private rented sector leasing scheme. I gave a talk to the local Cardiff Landlord Forum the other night, and a lot of the questions asked is, what is the motivation behind the scheme? So could you mind just telling us a little bit about the scheme, how it might work, and why Welsh Government are introducing it?
Okay. I think primarily the motivation is a partnership between government and the private rented sector in order to meet housing need in a different way. This is genuinely our interest in being innovative and working with the sector to find new solutions for people's housing need. In short, the principle of the scheme will be that a landlord, if they choose to, can proffer to rent their property to a local authority for a period of 5 years, in effect a head lease. The local authority will then take over management of that property, placing tenants who need good quality homes in there, supporting those tenants, so providing the kind of tenancy support that you would see in the social housing sector, but also reducing risk for the landlords. So the deal, if you like, is that the landlord would be offering the property at local housing allowance rate, less a small management fee, but in return they have no concerns about voids, they have none of the day-to-day responsibilities of managing the property and tenants, so they may be receiving slightly less, but they're guaranteed that monthly rent each month for as long as they're in the scheme, and the local authority has a good quality property to offer to tenants who need that security and stability and that support in order to make a success of a tenancy.
So in the case of the scheme, a lot of landlords also obviously like quite a lot of involvement with their own properties. So why has it been approached in terms of a leasing scheme where the landlord isn't involved on a day-to-day basis, rather than maybe working with landlords to provide this sort of accommodation with extra support?
In a way, this is a different approach. We know that some landlords like that daily involvement. We know that other landlords, perhaps accidental landlords that have inherited a property, they may actually prefer to be able to hand over that responsibility and have somebody else take care. So it's a deal that won't appeal to every landlord, but we think it will appeal to some. And the reason that we're choosing 3 local authorities to pilot the scheme initially is so that we can work out that finer detail, work out whether it has a market, whether we've got the offer right, and work out exactly what landlords need and tenants need and the local authorities need in order to make a success of it. So 3 pilot schemes in the first instance. Hopefully that will give us the information and the feedback to tweak the scheme if necessary before we look for a full rollout. But it's not intended to replace any other form of rental, it's an additional offer into the sector.
And onto the other big piece of legislation is the Renting Homes Act. Now I realise timescales can't necessarily go into entirely, but could you give us a bit of background why, bearing in mind it was reached royal assent in 2016, but yet we're at the end of 2019, and it's still not implemented. What's some of the challenges you've been facing, and can you tell us maybe where you are with that?
The implementation of that Act was never going to be a quick task. It's a significant change in legislation. There was an awful lot of subordinate legislation that needed to be drafted, consulted on, and brought through the assembly processes. So that's been ongoing. We're very near completion of that. There's then been some other issues negotiating with the court to get changes made to the court IT system so that those processes are aligned with the new requirements under the Act. We're in a good place now. Those things have come together, and we're moving forward to implementation. So early next year we'll be in a position to give some more firm timetables for that. But as you know, we're also proposing, we've been out to consultation on making some changes to the Act prior to its implementation. So complicated act. We're now going through a complicated process of taking forward some amendments that we feel will be beneficial at the same time as implementing it, but we are now on a trajectory to have it implemented.
And one of the areas that you alluded to there were some changes that you've made to the renting home since it's been reached royal assent. One of those areas is changes in possession procedures for landlords, so what is traditionally called Section 21 or W173 under the Renting Homes Act. So I think we can welcome the fact that the Welsh Government hasn't moved to completely banning Section 21 as has been mooted in England, so I think all landlords can give a little nod there at least. So do you want to give us an update as to where you are with that and maybe some of the motivations again behind implementing that?
Okay, I mean, the motivation is straightforward, that we're seeing changes in who is renting and how long people want to rent. People are looking for greater length of stability within the rented sector, and that's right and proper, and lots of people get that. A small number of cases, we see perhaps what is currently called Section 21 used when there are other reasons for wanting to retake possession of a property. What we're saying is that actually, if there's a breach of contract, there are routes to possession that should be used. If there's no breach of contract, we want to ensure that people have enough time to make the necessary arrangements to find a new home, change schools, doctors, all of those kind of practical things that we all find challenging when we move home. Doing that within a 2-month period of time is quite tight. So what we're proposing is that where there is no breach of contract, that people have more time in order to make a measured and careful transition to a new home.
And last question, I promised you, and I appreciate your candid answers so far. I think because of a lot of these changes, landlords are feeling kind of frustrated about the number of changes that have happened, and also the fact that they don't feel part of the process, and that their views and points of view aren't being heard. I know you can't talk about that on a political aspect, but from your point of view, what's useful? How can landlords feed into this process, and what's useful in terms of, as a policy maker and somebody that when a politician says we want to go in this direction, how you form your policy after that?
I mean, I think we've developed a developing good relationship with organisations such as your own, and you personally have been involved representing the views of your members on a number of our working groups. So we're trying to make sure that we're working with the sector. The sector is also very good at responding to our consultations, and those are genuine consultations. We've tried our best to listen and to bring forward policy change that balances the needs of all parties in these things. Can't say we get it right all of the time in terms of our engagement, but we're always happy to listen and happy to work with you and your members.
So in summary with that, the consultation responses are genuinely read and taken consideration of?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much, Emma, for being here today. Just signing off with that, so some very interesting points of view from Emma, and I hope that you can come along to this and many more future renting conferences in future. Thank you very much for being here with us today. It's Douglas Haig signing off.